Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Lieutenant Stephen Rogers, and welcome to This Week in North America. We have two great guests we'll be speaking with tonight, obviously one from Canada and our second guest one from the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, I've got to tell you, especially those who are watching from America, I have an audio that I'm going to play to you. It is stunning. It is something that was said by President Zelensky of Ukraine. It's making its way around the internet. It is now making its way around multimedia networks around the country. And I got to tell you, I was stunned to hear his words. I guess like all of you were here in the United States. Now, let me just qualify something before I play the audio. It's short, but it's sharp. There's a translator who you're going to be hearing with regard to the statement that Zelensky made at a meeting, I believe, in Europe. There have been some debate over whether his words were translated properly, but I've got to tell you, folks, whether it was translated properly by one person and maybe a little bit better by another, the meaning of what he said is not being debated. So again, now if you're a parent in the United States and perhaps even in Canada, because whatever happens here certainly happens there, I certainly don't want you to be alarmed over what he said, but it's something that I've been saying for quite some time. And I'm going to talk about what he said after we play the audio to you with our first guest in a few minutes. In fact, I may play this twice so that you get the gist of what he said. So I've got the audio here, and I'm going to put it up next to the mic, and let's hear what he had to say.
The U.S. will have to send their sons and daughters exactly the same way as we are sending their sons and daughters to war. And they will have to fight because it's nature that we're talking about. And they will be dying, God forbid, because it's a horrible thing. The U.S. will have to send their sons and daughters exactly the same way as we are sending their sons and daughters to war. And they will have to fight because it's nature that we're talking about. And they will be dying, God forbid, because it's a horrible thing.
So folks, for about a year, maybe more, I've been talking about the American people. You better wake up. You better understand that history is about to repeat itself. I hope to God that he's wrong, but for him to say that publicly at a meeting in Europe and knowing that he's being videotaped is just stunning. And to me, it's part of this idea that he's trying to bully, intimidate the United States to not only sending more money, and more arms and more weapons, but now our young men and women into combat. So, folks, you heard it yourself. All right. That's an audio of what he said. We do have the video. Again, just in case the fact checkers and those who are questioning whether he actually meant what he said, I'm qualifying this by saying what he said. How people interpret that, how they translate it, well, it may come out one way and another, but it's pretty clear, let's put it this way, of what he meant. So let's get to my first guest, Tanner. Let's go here. Tanner, how are we doing? Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Lieutenant, for having me on. It's always a pleasure to come on your show.
Well, you're back by popular demand. What do you think of that? So, all right, Tanner, for the sake of the people who haven't seen you before, very quickly, a little bit of your background. And then I want to talk to you about Zelensky's statement. Were you able to hear it?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Okay. How about your background? And then let's get right into it.
Sure. So my background is I'm an economist. I'm a trained economist, and currently I use that knowledge that I learned in economics to comment on political and ethical and moral and religious issues and ideas that are currently in vogue. And so that ranges from anything to carbon taxes to the war in Ukraine to all of these issues around the world. And that's and I go around and speak, and I don't know what you would call it. That's what I do.
Well, and I heard you do a real good job at that. So we certainly appreciate the work that you're doing. All right. So now we have a situation. For about 2 years, I've been talking on the air here on major media outlets here, and to the dismay of my government, the Democrat communist side of the government. I am probably one of the many or let's put it this way, one of the few retired military commanders who are speaking out against the prosecution of this war. And Tan, I've said all along, no one in their right mind would support the killing of civilians in any war. What Russia's doing with regard to targeting civilian infrastructure is wrong. We know that. But what is also wrong is to not tell the whole truth, to not give the whole story as to how we got where we are with regards to the war in Ukraine. So as I said earlier, and then I'm going to ask you to weigh in on this, when you look at the history of how America got involved in Vietnam, it parallels the history of how we're getting involved in an escalated war with Russia. It first began with money, then arms and ammunition in Vietnam. And then we didn't like the government of South Vietnam, so we decided to get involved to change it. All led up to what? U.S. combat troops going into Vietnam and ending with 50,000 killed in action and 100,000 or so wounded. So now we have Zelensky gets on this soapbox after he came here, by the way, and pretty much demanded that we send him more money and more arms and more aid. Now he's at a meeting in Europe saying, well, and it's not a lie he's saying. I mean, this is the truth. We know if NATO accepts Ukraine into their sphere of influence, indeed, U.S. combat troops may end up fighting that war, but in my view, without the blood and guts of any European fighting.
Right. Yeah, I think Zelensky's remarks are reprehensible. I think he has absolutely no jurisdiction to tell the United States of America or the soldiers of America that, yeah, you're coming over to fight in our country. I think that is a gross violation of his appointed task as a leader of an individual nation that isn't the United States. Now, with regards to my thoughts on the matter, they're the same. If our dear prime minister here decides to invoke a draft, I'm not saying he will, but suppose he did, if I had a choice between being drafted to go fight in that war or go to prison, then I'm starting a Bible study in jail. There's so much true disinformation with regards to this war. We're hearing all sorts of different things. I heard the other day that Biden touches down in Ukraine and no one had heard an air siren for how long? And then all of a sudden, when Biden shows up, all of a sudden the raids and the air sirens start going off. And as much deception as there is on one side, there is on another side as well. And so here I am thinking, well, okay, I'm hearing two totally different sides, two totally different realities. And the corruption in that block of Europe is so stiff that how can anyone make a proper judgment with regards to war except this isn't the time to be involved? We shouldn't be involved because, well, like you said, there is so much, it's so messy and it's so shrouded that I simply don't know, and I think so few do, what's actually happening, what's the actual purpose of it. And to be totally honest, if our leaders really want to send individuals my age and so on over to war, fine, then they should be the ones to go first. I find it funny that they're so eager to send soldiers off when they themselves are shielded in bunkers in the Capitol or what might have you. So I completely agree with your statements.
The question we've been asking of our leaders here is, will somebody in Washington tell us what national security interests do we have fighting Russia and Ukraine? I mean, yes. And the answer is none. Absolutely yes. None. I want to know, and Americans tend to want to know, and perhaps you could weigh in on this. I'd like to know who, what, when, where, and why there was labs in Ukraine that allegedly the Russians found.
Right. Yeah.
I'd like to know a lot about. Now I'd like to know, and I'm sure our Congress will find out, a lot about Hunter Biden's dealings with the Ukrainian government. I mean, all this is adding up to getting involved in a war. We don't have a national security interest, but maybe Joe Biden and his son and his family have a security interest. A security interest meaning to stay out of prison.
Right, sure. And, well, it wouldn't surprise me, even here in Canada. It's the funniest thing because supposedly, you assume assuming the elections were legit, Trudeau, our prime minister, and his government were elected by the Canadian people. And so, according to the hallmarks of democracy, which our government doesn't follow, that would mean that Trudeau and his government have an obligation to serve the Canadian people. But when you look at his actions, when you look at his government's actions, you realize that it seems like the Canadian people are the last ones that Trudeau even tries to serve. He serves everyone else, it seems, in the entire world, except his own people, insofar as, okay, so we have a housing crisis here. The mortgages, the rates of variable rate mortgages are skyrocketing, and inflation is skyrocketing, and groceries are skyrocketing, et cetera, et cetera. But instead of focusing on that problem, you have politicians like Trudeau instead lobbying and sending money over to who knows where in Ukraine. And who knows what that money is going to. They're sending tanks, they're sending fighters, they're sending, or jets, whatever it is. They're sending all of this equipment, and supplies, even while the people of Canada here are in trouble, are in difficulty. It's the funniest thing. You have Trudeau again, and these politicians say, well, we're going to go help Ukraine secure their borders. Let's go help Ukraine secure their borders. But here we are with Roxham Road. We can't secure our own borders. So, it just completely boggles the mind, because our government's abdicated its responsibility to the Canadian people and instead has apparently transitioned that or transferred that over to Ukraine or other nations around the world, even while we still have these problems that need to be solved here first. And so I find it to be, I find this whole situation to be rather insulting, actually, to the Canadian, because it telegraphs to us that we come second, even though, again, Canadians, if the election was legit, voted in Trudeau.
Speaking of Trudeau and his government, and I say it's his government because it certainly doesn't appear to be the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. As you know, Tanner, we've been working on a project called Project Maple Leaf. It's been a long, long haul for us. The information that we have received over the past year has been absolutely overwhelming. We're trying to vet a lot of it out. The purpose of Project Maple Leaf is to educate our lawmakers about what's going on in Canada. And again, in our view, Trudeau is trying to, or somehow, some way, trying to transition Canada into a communist-like country. This is our view based on the information we received. But we did find something, and I'm not going to get into too many details, but I'm going to kind of broach this discussion with you because I'm going to kind of ask you to weigh in if you could. We did find something that is very, very troubling to us here in America. Something that we're going to get into the hands of a couple of agencies here in America to do some further research on. I won't use the word investigate yet. But what we found is that there is a possibility that the Canadian government has somehow partnered with the United States government on an operation that we believe is illegal. Now, I don't say that just to say it. I mean, I feel that there was some illegal activity here, but I'm not the expert and I don't have the final say on that. But certainly what we found, I am absolutely positive it's going to draw the interest of our Congress and maybe our Justice Department. But as I said, we're being very careful and very methodical on how we're dealing with this, because if in fact that it is true, I got to tell you, I believe there'll be a firestorm across this country, across into Canada. I hope it's not. I really don't. I really hope that what we believe happened here is not true, but it remains to be seen if we could prove it. But, I've heard, again, aside from that, what I just shared with you, we've heard and had some information coming in over the year that there's a possibility that the U.S. government was involved in some operations or in some way, shape, or form regarding the Freedom Convoy. I'd like you to weigh in on that.
Sure. Oh, if there were, you know what, to be totally honest, the surprise wouldn't be it wouldn't be surprising if there were illegal activities. The real surprise would be if there weren't any illegal activities. For example, of course, I think almost every Canadian now knows that there are rumblings, serious rumblings of Chinese interference in our 2019 or in 2021 elections, and perhaps before that. And it becomes progressively worse when you realize that our intelligence agency seems to have told Trudeau and his government that there are issues with foreign interference in our elections. And Mr. Trudeau, in response, seems to have just dismissed those claims and tried to scuttle them. And now that they've resurfaced, and it seems to be causing some trouble, as they should. when questioned about one of our MPs, one of our members of parliament, similar to a member of Congress in your country, when asked if a certain member of parliament named Han Dong is his name, had ties to China and was funded by the CCP or by Chinese officials, Trudeau simply replied by saying that any questions about this MP's loyalty or any other related questions were racist. It's unbelievable. They don't get straight. We don't receive straight answers. We have a government that's clearly meddling in something nefarious. And now that the truth is coming to light, which is miraculous in itself, they're trying, of course, to just play it down and keep it quiet. But you can't. It's impossible, because you can, the reality is, and it's looking very much like it's so. The reality is, and again, although it's not proven in court, it's all but that there was foreign interference in the previous election. Now, you can try and bend that reality. You can try and twist that reality to mean something totally different. You can try and break that reality, but it won't break. You can't break reality. And even if you can silence it for a little while, eventually it's going to come back. It's going to rise from the dead and haunt you, as we're seeing now. So when you talk about this new project, I'm exceedingly encouraged, because it's certainly going to bring truth to light. It's going to, as you mentioned, engage in the proper research to discover what's actually happening, to discover what reality is, unlike what political leaders try to tell us. And so again, the surprise wouldn't be that there was illegal dealings going on or still going on. That wouldn't be surprising. The opposite would be true. But if there was shady business, that would be all but. Yeah.
Tanner, you used the word encouragement, and I would ask the Canadian people to be encouraged by observing what's happening here in America. As Tanner said, Justin Trudeau will dodge everything. The race card is played everywhere. There's every excuse why the government can't tell you this or tell you that. What Trudeau doesn't understand, and what Joe Biden didn't understand till recently, is that the government is not of Trudeau in Canada. It's not of Biden in America. The government is of the people, by the people, and for the people. And to use as an example, Trudeau can do all he wants and say all he wants to dodge the questions, as his Canadian Parliament puppets will, like our congressional puppets did, not do, did with Biden. Well, the tide has turned in America. The United States Congress now has multiple investigations going on. Fauci's going to be subpoenaed soon. Our U.S. military is going to be placed under investigation. The Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, you name it, there are multiple investigations going on, including investigations of the Department of Justice and Hunter Biden's laptop. Now, a lot has been exposed here in America that you haven't heard about, but you will hear about it, I'm sure, very soon. My point, Tanner, is this. They all get caught. Justin Trudeau is going to end up in the same place Joe Biden will. One or two places. Either they're going to be, elected, appointed, however you do it in Canada, it's somehow thrown out of office, same here in America, and they're going to either end up on a farm that's probably already purchased by the Chinese Communist Party, and the farm may not be in Canada and America, it may be over there in China, or they're going to be in jail, one or the other. It always happens that way, folks. They try to dodge. And I've said to congressional representatives here in the Democrat Party, especially, as well as I've said on the air, Canadian Parliament members or their operatives who are obviously watching, you're going to get caught. The ship is sinking. If you think Justin Trudeau is going to jump overboard, if you think Justin Trudeau is going to stay on board and sink with the ship, ain't going to happen. He'll be the first to jump off and let you sink and drown. Joe Biden tried to do that, Tanner. It didn't work. Not only is he sinking, but Democrats across the country are sinking. We've got Chinese Communist Party who bought up farms are finding out that they don't own the farms anymore in a number of states. We had the issue of the Chinese police departments, found a few, especially the ones in New York, closed up, they're gone. Chinese investments in America are now disappearing, and on and on and on. So the Chinese Communist Party is being shown the door in the United States of America. Now, my point is this. Somewhere along the line, I really believe that there is a thread always running between DC and Ottawa, always, because you got two guys that have embraced the ideology of Marx, Lenin, and Stalin. So they're doing this out of the same playbook. So saying all of that, and I'm thankful that you used the word encourage, I believe maybe hearing it from you because you're there, they might say, well, Lieutenant, it's easy for you to say be encouraged. You're there reaping, the rewards of the work that's being done against Joe Biden. But Tanner, I believe the Canadian people are winning. Little by little, the information's getting out. I believe you're winning.
Yes. Oh, I totally agree. I think the victory started with the convoy. I think that was, well, as everyone knows, that was a critical fulcrum that tipped the balance of power out of Trudeau's hand, at least as firmly as it was entrenched before, and back into the hands of the people. I think you're quite correct about no one gets away with anything ever. It's just,
Never.
It's the whole of history. Adam and Eve didn't get away with disobeying God, and our leaders won't get away with disobeying the law, with disobeying what's true, with disobeying what's righteousness. That truth that you can't get away with anything, that you can't break reality, is so fundamental that even when the Pharisees and the Romans and the Jews and mankind and so on tried to kill reality itself, even when they actually killed Christ, the way, the truth, and the life, I am who I am. I am the word of the Lord. Even when they actually killed reality itself, it simply rose from the dead. You can't silence it. You cannot beat it. It's impossible. You can lie about it. You can try and use your language to manipulate reality. You can say that the snow outside, which is white, is actually orange, but it isn't actually orange. It is white. You can say my room has 16 walls, but it doesn't. It has 4 walls like every other room. And so try as you might, no matter how hard you try and maneuver around reality, no matter how hard you, like Trudeau or Joe Biden, try to disregard reality, truth, as it actually is, even if you kill it, it's simply going to rise from the dead. And so I completely agree with you. How the timeline for such things, I suppose that's up for debate and so on, but it seems to be coming quickly. And I pray that it does. The faster it comes, the better, I think. So I'm encouraged, like you said. I'm very encouraged because more and more people are waking up. It isn't the opposite way around. It isn't that people were awake and now they're going back to sleep. No, it's the opposite. It's that even those who are still in slumber are beginning to open their eyes to the realities of all that our governments and bureaucrats have deceived us with over the past how many years?
Well, yes, it's coming, and I pray and believe it'll come quickly. But even if it comes slowly, I'm reminded of a quote by President Abraham Lincoln here in the States. He was kind of criticized for moving too slowly, and he would reply, "Well, I may be moving slowly, but I'm always moving forward." And I'm going to show what some of you may not see on camera. I just noticed that. I'm going to turn around here, and I'm going to show you that. Because of the Freedom Convoy and what's happened in Canada and all of the work that the Canadian people have done in their fight for freedom, and of course my fellow Americans, the work they've done. So we know we have this, right? Well, we have an addition right here. We are believing that we're going to have someone on from Mexico real soon. They're part of North America. I could tell you they've been watching some of our broadcasts, if not live. Again, the importance of sharing these broadcasts and sharing the information that we have. This is something that I think is terrific. That's why we call it North America. So I'm going to put these back here. All right. Well, all right, folks. So much for live television. What can I tell you? So folks, Tanner, another thing I want to bring up at the beginning of our broadcast, and we've been doing this now, and we're going to constantly up our game, if you will, against the World Economic Forum and the Chinese Communist Party. We did some research on the increased propaganda that the CCP is sending into Canada and the United States. The WEF is sending their propaganda in through other channels and to another, let's say, population, but it's there. But we're going to begin to answer them. We've answered the WEF this week. We answered the CCP this week. Tonight, people at our opening saw what was posted earlier across social media platforms that we're on. But I've got to tell you something, and I'm sorry I didn't take a picture of it just to prove what I'm about to tell you. So we launch our propaganda campaign against the CCP. And we sent, by the way, our videos and our tweets, etc., to the CCP embassy in Washington, D.C. So whether they see it or not, it remains to be seen, but they're getting it. Interesting enough, my phone rings. And you know how a state or a city comes up? Well, my phone rang, and under it said mainland China. So I didn't answer it. Because you never know who's on the other end and all that. I probably wouldn't be able to understand what they had to say. But I'm thinking, boy, I should have taken a picture of that. So it tells me, though, that, you know what we're saying and what we're doing is getting to where we want it to be. But my point is this. You mentioned Adam and Eve. You mentioned Christ. You mentioned that they'll never be able to put the light out. The Chinese Communist Party, and I'll throw the WEF in that pile, because, you know, in the 20th century, as you know, Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union the evil empire. Well, now we're calling the CCP and the WEF the 21st century axis of evil, the 21st century evil empire, those two. But as you know, the first assault that the CCP makes is on religion, is on worship of God. We got a report yesterday that the Chinese Communist Party are beginning to aggressively address Christians and Jews in China, locking them up, putting them in jail, taking their Bibles. I mean, it sounds like Hitler in Germany all over again, and Stalin and the Communist Party all over again. But this is what's happening in China. And my point is, when we hear about, and I'm going to get to somebody in a minute, when we hear about whether it be Joe Biden or Justin Trudeau cozying up to President Xi, not calling him out as a thug and the Communist Party in China as a group of thugs, that causes some concern, doesn't it? Which leads me to something that is causing Americans some concern now. I'm glad that we're getting a lot of information about Trudeau and his family, if you will, here in America, because what just raised a lot of eyebrows is hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Chinese Communist Party to the Trudeau Foundation. I think it was the father, Pierre's his name, Pierre Trudeau. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Oh, you actually have the whole story. What happened? Well, so the House of Trudeau is actually a very famous family in Canada, insofar as they're political giants. His father, Justin's father, Pierre Trudeau, was this political titan in the 70s and during something called an FLQ crisis. He's the one who presided over our current Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and all of these massive social changes in Canada. Well, then, of course, his son, Justin, is now our prime minister, and they seem to be ideologically similar, to say the least, and their goals seem to be almost exactly the same. Well, so the Trudeau started up this foundation called the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation, or the Pierre Trudeau Foundation, and with all of these revelations coming to light regarding the Liberal government and Trudeau, etc., their involvement with Chinese foreign officials, Chinese officials here in Canada, the Liberal Party's dealings with Chinese interference, and so on, people are taking a closer look at what those individuals, those Canadian individuals like Trudeau, are involved in. Well, as they're looking a little bit closer, they find out that, as you mentioned, the Pierre Trudeau Foundation received a $200,000, I think it was, donation from this Chinese individual or individuals, and which the foundation itself is trying to give back. You know, it wouldn't surprise me at all. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Trudeau and the Liberals, etc., were closely involved with China. We actually have a prime minister, if you can believe it, who said some years ago, and anyone can look about it online, that he admires or admired China's basic dictatorship. How is that possible that you can have a leader of a democratic and supposedly free country actually state in public that I actually admire China's basic dictatorship? And I think he said it was because it allows them to make policy decisions on a dime, and they can basically do whatever they want because they're a dictatorship. And so the surprise wouldn't be Trudeau involved with China. The surprise would be Trudeau not involved with China. Based on all that's happening right now, all of the evidence that's coming to light, it would be a miracle. It would completely fly in the face of reality if indeed it was true that Trudeau wasn't involved with China. And you can go, I was speaking at an event yesterday, and a gentleman at the event asked the question, where are solar panels made? They were talking about green energy. Another speaker was talking about green energy at this event. And of course, everyone knows it. All of these solar panels, all of these green energy machines that our politicians want to implement in Canada and presumably in America as well, although I see some of your officials in your states are passing laws to prevent that, are made in China. They're made by slaves in China, by individuals who are working for pennies a day, if that at all, in brutal conditions, using coal, using fossil fuels, and then that gets shipped over to us here in the West, and our leaders can parade their moral green energy revolution. We have solar panels, we have wind turbines, we have all of these things that are green and good for the environment, even though if you could just look X number of miles away across the sea, you would see how those green energy machines and how that green energy technology is produced in China. Of course, it's very lucrative for China, but not for the individuals working on it, and it certainly isn't lucrative for us. So all of these revelations coming to light, that looks more and more like Trudeau is seriously involved with China, and the House of Trudeau is involved with China, and the Liberal government is involved with China, et cetera, aren't really that surprising at all.
Well, our windmills off the Atlantic coast, especially here in New Jersey, are working very well. We have more whales and dolphins that have been killed and have been washing up on the beaches of New Jersey than ever before. My point is this, Trudeau, and I'll throw Biden in this, and the Democrats here, and probably a number of the members of Parliament in Canada. It's really astonishing when you look at how they're operating, whether it be Trudeau or Biden. So you got Trudeau unleashing the police on protesters who were nonviolent. I mean, we all saw it. The whole world saw it. So he unleashes police on peaceful protesters. He freezes the accounts of people, and admittingly by the individual, the justice there who did the inquiry, admittingly the accounts were frozen, but they really messed up when they couldn't figure out how fast they could get the money back. Locking up pastors who were praying, again, the attack on religion, Communist Party 101. All of this done without due process. That's what Trudeau admires. All of this done without due process. And by him making that statement and us connecting dots here in America over his policies, he has now caused a pretty much big red light going on here with a lot of our lawmakers. That's why I say, Tanner, that the reason why we have taken this cause on, at least one of the reasons we have taken this cause on with regard to the Canadian people, is that Trudeau and his policies are becoming a threat to the United States national security. That's my view, my opinion. It's the opinion of many others, and I'm sure you're going to be hearing a lot about that as we move forward. But those policies are bad. I don't want a communist country across my border. I don't want that. I don't want cops lined up that are like on the Berlin Wall, that are not trying to stop people from coming in like we are at the Mexican border. But Trudeau's policies would appear to be to keep your citizens in Canada to make sure they don't come out. This is what we believe is unfolding in Canada. But saying that, what else is unfolding is what you just said. They all get caught. Follow the money. The trail always leads to crime, criminal activity, unethical activity, and then people start jumping ship. I am confident because the Canadian people have conducted themselves in such a way within the framework of your laws that they're going to prevail, just like we did. We had an issue, of course, in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. That's being dealt with. That's a whole other issue. But there have been protests all over America that you haven't heard about, quiet protests, where school board meetings, city councils, state assembly meetings, federal government offices, quiet protests. And the most effective protest, Tanner, and we've been winning this battle from local municipalities all the way up to DC, the most effective protest was going to the polls and throwing them out of office. And that's where we are right now. And there's a domino effect taking place across America. Governors are now passing laws to prohibit the Chinese Communist Party from getting involved and buying land and doing business in any way, shape, or form in this country. That's happening. But my point is, all that, you start connecting the dots, and you know where that final dot is? That final dot's going to be at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C., the White House. And I would venture to say that when the investigation of the White House begins, it just may lead for the fact checkers, all right, may lead to Ottawa. What do you think?
Yeah, well, you know what? It wouldn't surprise me. Again, you look at how everything seems so synchronized between our governments. Not just our American and Canadian governments, but Western governments around the world. They seem to be in such perfect sync. It's almost like perhaps they're meeting somewhere else. Well, we know they do at G20 or G7 or what might have you. They have all of these other meetings that they discuss, WEF, and talk about.
Didn't your prime minister sing at one of these meetings? Wasn't there some sort of
yes.
drunken party or something?
Yeah, he's done quite a few things. But even, I like that you brought up the protesting and how many quiet protests you've had in your country. Here, it's the same thing. Right now, what's politically vogue is to talk about and protest something called a land use bylaw. And I'm speaking here particularly to my province. We had a county in our province, about a month ago, bring up a serious concern. It was a rural county. It's called Thorhild. It's a farming county, a farming community. And their councillors, which is like their municipal government, even though they're mostly on the farm, were trying to update the land use bylaws, how you can use your land in that county. Well, that included for farmers how high they could make fences. If they could put a fence there at all, they needed a permit. Like if you wanted a barbed wire fence around your field, you needed a permit. It talked about how many animals you could have on your property. It had all of this nonsense injected into the updated bylaws that it was impossible to pass. So the people, rightfully so, congregated together, went to their council, to the county chambers, and demanded that the bylaws not be passed. And they weren't. Now, the remarkable thing about that pseudo-protest, that charge to their councillors to not pass that bylaw, is that we've noticed it's spread across the whole province. You have so many people now attending their county meetings and their municipal meetings to see exactly what their officials are passing. And what we're finding is that most often the officials themselves don't even know. They're given a new set of rules from our major centers, our major cities to impose. And because the document they receive is usually dense, they don't read the entire thing, or they read just a part of it, and then they pass it and call it good. But now, because the people are becoming more and more involved, they're holding those county officials' feet to the fire, and they have to actually read what they're trying to pass. It's remarkable because a lot of alarms have been raised, and individuals are more alert now than ever, and county officials know they have to do the right thing now more than ever, because if they don't, of course, they'll have not a riot, but they'll have an issue on their hands.
Well, we're running out of time. Boy, I got to tell you, I have to have you come back. But one more topic before I say goodbye to you and bring on our other guests. On Sunday morning, our team is going to be meeting with a group of individuals here in the United States to talk about C11 in Canada. But we're not only going to talk about it, we're in the process of doing something about it. Not only are we informing our government lawmakers about what's going on there. And by the way, it's probably the first time Campaign for America will have the support of big tech, Facebook and all these. I mean, it's like a buddy-buddy thing here. I think they want to take us out for a beer now. And interesting enough, we've lasted on the air. Nobody's kicked us off yet. So you got to wonder why, right? But we're going to do something. We're going to actually talk about Radio Free Canada. There was Radio Free Europe. There was Voice of America. So I'm talking to a lot of people that are in that field And if the Canadian government decides to really, truly go sideways with regard to censoring or prohibiting internet communications in and out of Canada, we're in the process of finding a way to get information to the people. Embarrassing, isn't it? Trudeau's things out there, isn't it? You guys are watching, aren't you?
Unbelievably embarrassing. It's communistic. That censorship bill, among so many others, is so egregious. It's almost impossible to process how a man with any pride in himself at all could defend even the precepts of that bill. It's unconscionable. I don't understand it. You are exactly correct, and believe me, as a Canadian, we are we are happy to receive all the help that you can provide in overturning that bill and hopefully many others.
Well, as John Paul Jones, a famous officer in the Navy, once said, we have just begun to fight. Tanner, thanks for joining us, and we're going to have you on again, all right? We got a lot to talk about, but it's always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you.
You bet. Thanks a bunch, Lieutenant. I always appreciate it. So much fun to be on your show.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, Tanner, right? I mean, what a guy he is. Another patriot that, is really admired by so many people, not only in Canada, but here in America and around the world. Okay, I'm going to have Alexandria Levine come on. We're going to be talking about the dramatic increase in anti-Semitism here in the United States and the need for the United States to stay close to Israel. I'll be back in a minute with Alexandria. Well, that was a quick minute, wasn't it, folks? Stand by and let's see what we can do here. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for, again, joining us here on This Week in North America. We got a very special guest, some individual that has been admired by people not only in the United States, but around the world. Now, I'm going to ask Andrea Levine, who's our guest, and you see her on the screen right now. Andrea, thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant.
Andrea, you have worked in the forefront of the fight against anti-Semitism, in the fight to ensure that the United States of America continues to partner with Israel against terrorism and the enemies of Israel. But before we get into that, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? You're speaking to a global audience now, so I'm sure a lot of people would like to know what you're doing, who you are, and how'd you get where you are today?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, I was born in Sarasota, Florida. So I'm an American citizen. I'm 100% Jewish. Parents are Jewish. All four of my grandparents are Jewish. But before that, a lot of my family were Holocaust survivors. They came from Belarus. They came from Poland. They survived Auschwitz. But even before then, they survived the pogroms. And a lot of my relatives that lived in Russia actually immigrated to what we now have Israel. I'm actually a direct descendant of a prime minister of Israel. Moshe Sharetz is my relative. He was the second prime minister of Israel and the first foreign minister of Israel. So a lot of my family actually built Israel in 1948 and before that, and worked under the first prime minister, David Ben-Gurion. But living in Sarasota, Florida in the 80s and 90s, surprisingly, there was a lot of anti-Semitism, specifically in the classrooms. And a lot of it had to do with ignorance from the parenting of these kids that were picking on me. It wasn't until 1994 where the state of Maryland mandated that the Holocaust be taught in the entire state, which made a big difference because from age 5 to age 13, I was heavily discriminated against for being Jewish until my middle school finally started to teach the Holocaust. Then when we started to teach the Holocaust, then the kids finally realized that what happened to me, wasn't because of me, it was because of the Nazis. And they all embraced me and we all became, one, we all became friends. And instead of me, segregating myself from the non-Jewish children, I actually accepted them into my world and introduced them to Hanukkah and Passover, invited them to my home. I went to church with them. I celebrated Easter with them. And we all learned traditions together. And that's one of the biggest things that I fight for is Judeo-Christian values and Jews and Christians working together. Now we fast forward to today, anti-Semitism unfortunately is on the rise, and the squad that are in Congress are the ones pushing this anti-Semitic rhetoric and pushing this anti-Semitic narrative. And one of the biggest things that I got involved with, and this is how I met you, Lieutenant, was Jexit, the organization, #Jexit or Jexit Inc. And we went on literally the steps of Capitol Hill in May 2019, and we fought against the HR 183 resolution, which was supposed to combat anti-Semitism, and it was supposed to call out Congresswoman Ilhan Omar for the anti-Semitic rhetoric that she said before she was a congresswoman and now currently. And now because of Jexit Inc.'s efforts, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar is officially off the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So I give kudos to you, Lieutenant, and I give kudos to my organization as well. And Lieutenant, you have been with our organization since the beginning, and we thank you for that. And we thank you for your praise, and we thank you for your kind words and your celebration of Judeo-Christian values as well. But this needs to stop, this anti-Semitism. It is now still invading our classrooms. We have now situations where there's hate groups spewing out anti-Semitic rhetoric to rabbis, to synagogues. And we have to differentiate between the difference between freedom of speech and hate speech. And that's the problem, is that they keep saying, well, this is freedom of speech. Well, when you tell someone to go burn in the oven, it's not freedom of speech. That is now hate speech. And those people need to be held accountable, and they're not being held accountable. So that's one of the biggest things that I try to do with the organization Jexit Inc. is to hold people accountable for the anti-Semitic rhetoric, to stop this act of hate speech that's going on in the classrooms, and also to work with lawmakers, legislators, to make it mandated that they teach the Holocaust in all 50 states. Unfortunately, the Holocaust is only mandated to be taught in 26 states of the nation. Or I'm currently in the state of Maryland. They only mandated in certain counties in the state of Maryland and not the entire state. So this needs to change. And that's something that I have fought for my entire life and continue to fight for. Another thing I also fight for is having 24/7 security, police enforcement at all synagogues nationwide, not just on the big holidays, but 24/7, because we're finding out that a lot of synagogues and churches are being attacked by a lot of bad people, and this needs to stop as well, and we need to have 24/7 security.
Wow, you've had a long history of fighting anti-Semitism, actually on the front lines, and with your family deeply involved with the roots of Israel is very, very important, because you really felt it back in the days when you were younger. And I tell you what, I commend you for stepping up at an early age and recognizing the problems we have in America and around the world with regard to anti-Semitism. What troubles me is that we've done a lot. You've done a lot. Jexit has done a tremendous amount of work in fighting anti-Semitism. Obviously, we have But it seems to me that it's stalled somewhere, that the Congress, that state lawmakers in other words, like Groundhog Day, we're repeating the same thing over and over again when, in my view, and I know this might sound rather controversial, but I look at the Nazi Party as a party that should be classified as a terrorist, a domestic terrorist organization. And those individuals in that party should be jailed. Now, of course, there'll be the hue and cry over the First Amendment, but there's no redeeming value that anything the Nazi Party can offer that is positive. They're, in my view, they're terrorists, and they've targeted Jews throughout history, and they're really increasing. I mean, there seems to be a rising of membership in the Nazi Party. Now, I'm not in Florida, but we're getting a lot of news information, especially in the Palm Beach area, where Jews are waking up with flyers on their cars, flyers on light poles. The Nazis seem to be dramatically increasing their activity there. Now, I know Governor DeSantis has worked very hard to fight this, but it seems to me, and maybe you could help clarify some things, that all the work that's being done, I'm wondering why these people aren't in jail yet.
I agree with you on that. I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. And I think what's going on in Florida is we're trying to get to the root of who is supporting organizations down there. These groups, there's one called like Goyim Defense League, which just recently attacked a Chabad in Orlando, and I was the one that told Jews to go burn in the oven. And this guy, his name is Joe Demonadeo, that's his name. Minadoa, I can't pronounce his last name properly, but he was actually arrested in Poland at Auschwitz a few years ago for putting up posters with anti-Semitic rhetoric on there. But if he was arrested there, he should still be there. The fact that he was released is in Orlando for spewing out anti-Semitic rhetoric. And there was police actually there at the Chabad watching these vigilantes do this, and nothing happened to them. There was no consequences. I think a lot of these organizations are arranged by CARE. CARE is very heavily known in the Orlando area. CARE is a terrorist organization. Their headquarters are right in Washington, D.C. There's a lot of Democratic lawmakers that recognize CARE, which is disgusting. They should be held accountable for recognizing CARE and for supporting CARE. And I think the problem is when all of these organizations are supported by what they call the blood money, the terrorist organizations, the George Soros of the world, a lot of times it's very hard to defeat just those one or two people. And that's why we, the people, myself, Jackson, other people, we have been fighting. And we need more of us to fight and really combat this issue and to really pound on this issue and to hold these people accountable and make sure that they do end up in jail for long periods of time.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. The key word is accountability. And unfortunately, the rest of the Congress doesn't seem to want to hold their feet to the fire. But I believe we, the people, can. I truly believe that. And we're going to continue to work hard, work together with JEXIT and other organizations, fighting the good fight, if you will. But, we have requested that Christian clergy, men and women, begin to speak out and stand up more forcefully. I'm very disappointed that many of them have not even addressed this issue, and they could safely address it from behind the pulpit. And they need to do that. And we're going to start getting in touch with a lot of them across the country, and we're going to ask them to do just that, because this has to be a community effort. This is not just a fight for Jewish people. It's a fight for all of us, is it not? Because what's that saying? They come for the Jewish people and nobody says anything, and eventually they're coming for you. So it's neat. We need to speak up. Now let's get to Israel for a moment. I know you've been really on the forefront of defending the right of Israel to exist. And there seems to be now an increase in a lot of enemies around Israel once again. I'm very disappointed in the Biden administration, very disappointed that they have not taken an aggressive stand against the enemies of Israel. But I got to tell you, Alexandra, we need to stand strong with Israel, our only and loyalist ally in the Middle East. And I'm troubled over our foreign policy at this point. But can you give us your view, since you've been on the front battle lines there?
Well, there's a reason why Israel had another election, because the newest election, the newest coalition that was there with Naftali Bennett, I mean, he caused a lot of problems getting involved with the Arab regime. And that's why they called for another election, because of the threat of Iran. And that's why Bibi Netanyahu is the prime minister again. I lived in Israel under his leadership. My parents were in Israel under Bibi Netanyahu's leadership. The country was very safe under his leadership. And he is taking a hard stance on protecting his people and protecting the country Israel, making sure that there aren't any missiles thrown from Iran or from Syria or from Lebanon or from the Arab nations. And he wants to continue with expansion of the Abraham Accords, which is something that President Trump started with former Secretary of State Pompeo and Peter Navarro and Rick Grenell and others, and Jason Greenblatt and his son-in-law Jared Kushner. So that's also something that we need to focus on. Saudi Arabia was one of the countries that was in the mix of being a part of the Abraham Accords. And the countries such as Sudan and UAE and Bahrain have kept their treaty with Israel. So now Israelis can go to Bahrain, they can go to Sudan, they can go to UAE because of the Abraham Accords. Unfortunately, the Biden administration under Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, he doesn't even recognize that it's called the Abraham Accords because he says it's too religious, which is ridiculous. So Israel, of course, is our biggest ally. We need to support them. We need to protect them. They love us. They love doing business with us. A lot of states do trade agreements with them. For example, in the state of Florida, we have FIBA, which is the Florida Israel Business Accelerator. That is a direct trade. Florida has a direct trade agreement with Israel. We use their central intelligence, their agriculture, their environment. Each state needs to keep that alliance with Israel alive so we can help each other. Israel doesn't like it when they have to help themselves. They want the help of their ally, America. And if we have a president, we have Biden who's in there that doesn't help Israel, that's not good. And to be honest with you, and I think we can all agree on this, President Trump was the most pro-Israel president we've ever had in the history of our nation. That's why that's why a lot of people, especially in Florida, really want President Trump to be the Republican nominee, and they want him to be president again and be back in the White House, because they know that he will keep that strong alliance with Israel, make it stronger, expand on the Abraham Accords, and we can have peace in the Middle East again. Because now we don't have peace in the Middle East under Biden. We had peace in the Middle East under President Trump.
The enemies of America and Israel like to spread a lot of propaganda to put fear into the hearts of the American people, or anyone who wants to support Israel. Which brings me to this point. When President Trump talked about recognizing, putting the embassy in Jerusalem, right? There was a lot of activity about there'll be violence, there'll be war, there'll be bloodshed. Not a shot fired, not a peep, right? I mean, so it goes to show you, and I've tried to share with our audience, that the enemies of freedom and liberty, the enemies of the United States, Israel, of Canada, and other states where the enemies of freedom and liberty are advancing, are using propaganda. They're using a propaganda war against us to instill fear into us, to immobilize us. We see that with the anti-Semitism. What is it? They're using flyers. They're using the internet. They're using all sorts of activities to put fear into the hearts of people. And we have to make sure that we continue to do what you're doing, what Jexit is doing, and what we're doing, is to counter what they're doing with the truth. And the truth is, as you just articulated, that the Israeli government has never let the United States down. In fact, the Israeli government has not let anyone down around the world. I remember when Florida was hit with a vicious hurricane there, and a lot of people were hurt. Some died. The buildings were collapsing. Who were the first people on the ground? Who were they? Israelis, right. They came with all their equipment and they helped save lives. And that's the truth that we need to get out to let people know. Well, before we depart, two things. Now, I know you may not want me to say this, but you're one of the finest singers that many of us have ever had the opportunity to hear. And would you just talk a little bit about your, I mean, really, I'm giving you an opportunity because people are looking at you saying, you know what, here's a real American hero, but you've really been able to communicate people through your wonderful gift of singing.
Thank you. Well, I was a professional opera singer for many years. I studied classical opera. I studied at the most refined institutions. I studied Manhattan School of Music, Juilliard, Longy School of Music up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and then at NYU for my master's. And I just started working with renowned opera singers as well. And just wanted to really study my craft and help it grow. And I was very fortunate that I was able to perform in Israel and Italy and Europe and all over this great nation. And I currently sing now at a lot of different political events. I usually sing America the Beautiful or God Bless America or the Star Spangled Banner. And I will be getting back more into the opera world now that things are being opened. It was very hard during the pandemic in the operatic and the Broadway profession. But yeah, I love singing. I love bringing that joy to people and being an inspiration. And it's so interesting how I went from, being this opera singer to being this political person. But it happened and I love it. And I love how I can incorporate music and politics together.
Well, that's terrific. God uses us. He uses the gifts and talents that he gave us for his glory and for the cause of freedom and liberty. So, Alexandra, I thank you so much for taking the time to join. Can you come back sometime? Would you come back sometime?
I would love to. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your support and everything that you do.
Well, thank you. God bless you, and we'll be in touch with you. Thanks again, Alexandra. There you go, folks. Alexandra Levine. You talk about you want to find heroes, folks? Well, there you go, right there. There's a hero who's been working very hard since she was a young lady, and now she's using the gifts and talents. All right, folks, I'm back, and that obviously I had recorded that interview earlier in the week because she's down at CPAC. But I've got to tell you, folks, what a great individual. So it was a good night, wasn't it, folks? We learned a lot. We're on the march. We are. And we're going to make sure that the Canadians and the Americans and freedom-loving people around the world will not fall into the arms or the hands of the Chinese Communist Party or any communist government. And we're going to do our best here in America to protect our country from any infringement of Justin Trudeau and that parliament. Like I said, we're not investigating and trying to take any actions against the Canadian government. That's not what we do. But what we do is protect our government here in the United States. And if in protecting our government, we're protecting the Canadian people from what we believe to be a communist influence growing in Canada, well, we're protecting our government. So why don't they take that to the bank and worry about it? So, folks, I thank you all for joining us, and please keep us in your prayers. As you know, we are not, we don't get any type of investments here with regard to companies supporting us, corporations supporting us. We stay away from that because once you start accepting donations or contributions from people that are involved in corporate America, corporate Canada, corporate anywhere, well, you become beholden to them. We've had some political people that wanted to make contributions. We turned them down because we don't want to be beholden to anybody. So this is purely supported by the people that want freedom and liberty. So I would ask you to consider sending a contribution there. It's the website, campaignforamerica.com. Just go to that donate bar, and we're not asking for much. Just like I say, pay your taxes, take care of your family first, and if you spare some, give us some assistance, I would appreciate it. I even struggle asking for it. I don't like doing this, but I see us growing. When I see this other flag, the Mexican flag, because of a Mexican that makes a phone call and says, hey, look, any chance we could join the team? Well, yes, you can. When we're talking about Israel and we're talking about more and more people from around the world looking for freedom and liberty, it just so happens that because of you, and here's where you come in, folks. Thousands of you have gotten that certificate of partnership from Campaign for America. Save that for the rest of your life and give that to your children and children, because you are impacting people worldwide. Believe me, we've gotten emails, I've gotten letters, we've even gotten some phone calls from people in different countries who have told us that they have received the videos from people in North America who are sharing them. So this is what we believe is our mission. It's a God-given mission. It's our time in this century to do what we must do to preserve freedom and liberty for those of the next generation. That is your kids and mine, your grandchildren and mine. So thank you so much for your prayers. Prayer is powerful, so please don't forget to do that. See you next Thursday, 7 p.m. here on This Week in North America. And again, campaignforamerica.com. We could use your help, and I guess we probably could use the help of God more than anybody else, and we know he'll deliver, right? And if you are running into a problem, if you're running into serious problems, family, health, fear, anxiety, please remember the one resource you have in your home right now is a Bible. Go to that Bible. Read a few Psalms. Fear not, for I am with thee, says the word of God. For I am the Lord thy God. I am with you. I have to do this every day, folks. Don't you think? I get kind of, distressed and, my head's spinning. I wonder what God on earth are we going to do with this and what are we going to do with that? And I've learned by reading the Bible, well, the first thing, Lieutenant Rogers, you got to do is hear me. Hear who? Hear God. No voice out of the sky, folks. You hear him by reading his word of God. Because you start reading that word, that's food for the soul. That's water for a very thirsty heart. So keep that in mind. There is where your strength is, the sword of the Spirit, the word of God. What do you think of that? So whatever you're going through, you know what? Relax. Take this time to talk with him and let him talk with you through his word. All right, folks, God bless you. See you next Thursday night here on This Week in North America. Thank you for all that you're doing in the fight for freedom and liberty. And I salute you. Thank you. God bless you all.